Hello everyone, I think we're ready to get started. Welcome to our third installment of the Uptown Jefferson Steering Committee meeting. We have a good program for you tonight. We're going to be talking mostly about new blocks and new streets, streetscape beautification. Before we get to that though, we have some housekeeping we have to take care of. Take roll call here for our committee members. Member Carey?
Here.
Member Kite? Member Hagel?
Here.
Yeomans? Member McCracken? And Member Hogan?
Here.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, we have a pretty good program tonight covering these 8 topics here. I'll turn it over to Kate here in a second, but one thing I wanted to point out for the presentation tonight, it's broken down into sections, and at the end of each section there will be a slide that says questions. We've noticed that it's better to do that when you've been waiting to ask questions all the way at the end, and sometimes it's hard to remember those questions all the way. It's a lot of information. So we'll pause in between sections, take your questions, and then of course at the end we'll have plenty of time for comments and questions after that. So I will now turn it over to Katie to get us kicked off.
Thanks, Luke. So everybody hopefully has an agenda picked up from the back table. And as you can see, we have a very busy agenda, 8 items that we wanted to discuss this evening. The first of which we wanted to talk a little bit about the key discussion points and key takeaways that came out of the previous steering committee meetings. We'll go over those first. Second, we're going to be talking about the value of smaller blocks, narrower streets, building visibility, street frontage, and alleys, and kind of how they all impact the urban character of an area. Then we'll jump into our future hypothetical street grid network that we've come up with, which is just a concept, and I want to emphasize that it's just a concept, one potential way that the street grid could potentially develop. And then we'll jump into our draft block size standards and how we are planning on implementing those standards as a part of the specific plan. And then I will actually let Luke present a case study on how smaller blocks could potentially come about as a result of the specific plan. And then number 6, we'll be talking about our future street cross-sections. As a part of the specific plan, we are developing new street cross-sections, so we'll be talking about those and the elements that that may include. And then talking a little bit about our draft streetscape beautification plan, and then finally wrapping it up, re-reviewing the project schedule and the future steering committee meetings. So with that, jumping into some key discussion points and key takeaways, we wanted to follow up with a lot of you that had some specific questions that came up at the first 2 steering committee meetings. And as most of you probably recall, at the meeting that took place on August 28th, we did talk about legal non-conforming land uses and how the plan was going to address that issue. And a legal non-conforming land use would be a land use that is currently allowed in the specific plan area now under the existing zoning, but would no longer be allowed under the new specific plan zoning. And the Jefferson specific plan is going to indicate that if an existing land use or business is no longer permitted under the new specific plan, that it would be able to continue, as it were, as a legal non-conforming use, and it would be grandfathered. And kind of related to this legal non-conforming issue that came up, I think it was Neil, who I don't see, there you are, was asking about the 180-day, basically if you have a legal non-conforming land use and it's discontinued for a period of 180 days, it would lose its legal non-conforming status, so it would lose its grandfathered status. And as a result of that comment, what we've done is we're proposing new language in the plan that would allow for a legal non-conforming use to be discontinued for a period of 1 year, to give property owners a little bit more leeway in being able to rent out that space for the legal non-conforming use. And the intent is after 1 year, would no longer be grandfathered. However, kind of to allow for a little bit more flexibility, we're also looking at implementing as part of the plan, allowing a property owner to submit a request for an extension so that they could, if they're experiencing a hardship in getting their space leased, they could come to the city knowing, I'm approaching that 1-year time frame, and they would be able to extend their grandfathered status at that point. And key takeaway number 2, which I think Carlene, you had brought up before, asking the question of how would the plan handle legal non-conforming buildings if they were destroyed, say for example by fire or earthquake or something like that. And right now we're proposing that if 51% or more of a legal non-conforming building is destroyed, that the structure would then be restored in full conformance with the specific plan. So anybody have any questions related to the discussion items from the first 2 meetings? Okay. We can always come back to this later if you think of something. So moving into the next section, I want to talk about the benefits of smaller blocks, narrower streets, alleys, and urban building placement. And many of you will probably recognize these next slides because we did discuss these items during the visioning workshops. So jumping into issue number 1, block size. Smaller blocks are more pedestrian friendly, and smaller blocks provide for easier accessibility for people to be able to access the area, to walk around the block. They don't have to travel quite as far when the blocks are smaller. They can traverse through a district or neighborhood a lot easier. Smaller blocks also allow for better wayfinding. People can find destinations that they're looking for easier when there are smaller blocks instead of large expansive blocks that they would have to traverse. Smaller blocks are also more human scale, sized more for people instead of cars, so making the experience when you're walking down the street a lot more comfortable. And smaller blocks also encourage people to park once and then walk, which is beneficial. They can park their car, they can go to the dry cleaners or the ice cream shop and walk around that district and then get back in their car and go. So this is a case study kind of juxtaposing 2 different ways that blocks can be handled in an urban environment. And the first of which is Old Town, which we're all familiar with, where the blocks are relatively small in size, there's alleys, it's easy to walk around, in comparison to Jefferson, where you can see the block size that's highlighted in yellow is a very large area. The roadways are curvilinear and it's much more auto-dominated. And just to give you an example, for walkability's sake, we did a little test, us planning staff, and we timed how long it took for us to walk around the block in Old Town, and that was able to be done in about 10 minutes or so. And then we took that same pace and applied it to Jefferson and figured out to walk around this large block highlighted in yellow would take about 40 minutes, just to kind of give you an example of the 2. So issue 2, street width. Narrow streets typically equal slower traffic. And when the traffic slows down, it's safer for pedestrians and cyclists to be on the street. It's a lot more comfortable for them when they're walking within some of these districts. Slower traffic also means quieter traffic noise. And slower traffic also makes it easier to find on-street parking and to access a lot of the different businesses along the street. And also when your streets are narrowed and your traffic is slower, that the businesses are a lot more visible from the cars. And so you can see this example where we have Jefferson, which is a very wide street. The businesses are not very visible from the street in comparison to our example, showing a narrow street where you can see a lot of the businesses, the signage, the cars are moving slow, the parking is on street. So 2 different concepts there. And issue 3, buildings close to the street. When buildings are close to the street, it creates a more intimate streetscape, which you can see an example in streetscape A. When buildings are close to the street, they provide shade and shelter from the wind and sun when pedestrians are walking in the area, and it also allows for businesses to be much more visible, and it's easier to attract customers, as opposed to streetscape B, where we have the buildings, they are pushed way back from the street with a sea of parking in front, and so, typically we have businesses getting creative with Mr. Beck to attract customers to their business. And so in talking about buildings getting pushed up to the street, the Jefferson specific plan is intended to require that buildings will be placed on a build-to line, which is the red line shown in this sketch. And we are proposing that the build-to line will be 10 feet behind the property line, and this is intended to get the buildings, push them up to the street, create that walkable environment, and get a continuous facade of buildings to create the more urban character that we're looking for. And I think we talked about this at the last meeting too, so this is probably familiar again. Issue 4, the value of street frontage. The ability of a property to generate income is enhanced by the number of people who pass by it. So if a business with street frontage, businesses with street frontage have increased visibility, and visibility increases property value. Because typically, businesses that are very visible from the street probably can collect a higher rent. They don't have to pay as much money for advertising because they have all these cars passing by, and it's easy for people in the community to see that particular business. And issue 5, the value of alleys. Alleys are important because they separate the service functions like trash collection, utilities, from the actual usable entrances. And alleys also avoid conflicts between delivery trucks and customers, which you can see in the middle photo. That's a picture from Old Town where the delivery truck is parked out in the middle of the street, blocking traffic and blocking potential customers from being able to park. So alley access would eliminate people having to make deliveries like that just from the roadway. Alleys also keep trash and garbage away from the customers because the trash trucks can service the trash from the rear, from the alleys. And they also are a great place for utilities, so that the utilities have a nice clean place in the alleys, and they are not cluttering up the sidewalks, with pedestals, wires, and equipment, keeping, the pedestrian path free. So that is the end of all of those benefits, and I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions.
Designs that we saw last time, and I think they're great. What I worry about is from San Diego County, I see where those types of structures are now not functional. They are downtown San Diego, Gastown, eliminated this type of approach. How do we, it's like it's taking it back to the 1800s rather than getting it traffic, businesses, people that we're going to have here. So how are we going to handle that? With this new change, where are they going to park? We have residents, I know Uptown, because there's no parking. They don't want to park in the structure, but they want to park where they're moving. So will this be a fad that goes away?
Well, I don't think so. To go to the point of parking, that's a huge issue. But parking is something that has to be solved. You've heard us talk about some more redevelopment. Hello? With redevelopment being eliminated, it's really difficult for the city to solve that problem. And it's a huge one. We had a developer focus group, some of you might have been there, where the developers said if we could solve the parking, then you could solve it all. And you've seen that here in Old Town with the parking structures in the freestanding parking lots. As far as a fad and going away, I think it's kind of the opposite. It was the standard for centuries, and then the automobile came into play, and we got away from it, and it's kind of coming full circle. So from that respect, I don't think it's a fad, and I don't think it'll go away.
So you think it's economically functional?
Yeah, I do think it's economically functional.
In Temecula, there's a beautiful area that is similar to one of the courtyard escapes that you know, it's not economically functional for that owner. So that's my concern, you know, as a property owner. I think it's beautiful. I hope it works, but I have a lot of concerns about the economic feasibility as a building owner and being able to maintain and keep it up. I don't think we're going to get the rents that are going to be needed to keep buildings maintained and I like the idea of the residences in I think that's exactly what we need. But when I drove around that corridor today before this meeting, I didn't have a chance to meet you guys before, I'm sorry. And I thought, wow, you know, what a huge, huge accomplishment this is going to be, and it's going to take. So, you know, I'm not sure. I got to think about it some more and wait the comments and then have time to prepare for a night. But I've just seen areas in towns where these are now obsolete and they're cutting everything around and doing. The mansions, the staff apartments, you know, other types of things. They're beautiful, but I don't see them in other areas. So I don't know how we can get where the documentation or economic evaluation is to substantiate the
Well, we had, and we mentioned this before, Kaiser Marston did a study, an in-depth study on the feasibility of this type of development, and we can provide that to you, and that shows you that it would be in-depth economics of how this could work, and it's over a 30-year period too. This isn't, you know, we're not talking about overnight, obviously, so we can get that to you, and that study, as long as you feel it's a legitimate study, it shows it's in that economically viable situation.
I want to follow along with that. I have two buildings right in the middle, Jefferson area. One's 20,000 square feet, one's 10,000. Obviously, they're going to be non-conforming. Can you tell me where this is working? Because I live in Carlsbad, and we have two developments down there. Harveston, this is one of the big developments down there. Real estate values have crashed. I mean, it's the only part of Carlsbad that is not keeping up because it was cute on a blueprint, but nobody wants to live on a street that they can't park on. And there's also the transit center in Carlsbad. You guys know that at all? 1.5 cars per unit, living unit. The place has been empty for 5 years. They can't sell them. It was a government program. The plans look great. They have Metro, they've got 4 different train stations. It's not working. So can you tell me where it's working?
It's working in every downtown that's vibrant and thriving. I can't speak specifically to Carlsbad. I'm not all that familiar with the specifics and the development you're talking about. You said it's a government. Is it an affordable housing project?
They've got everything there. They've got everything from $1.2 million where you live on top and the lofts on the bottom. Those are now selling for $450. They've got it's a mix.
Well, you know where I can see that it's working is right here in Old Town. We have people calling us every day, and this is true. Every week we have people calling us, actually angry with us that there's not more residential development of the type that's here. Because most of that's here in downtown is affordable, which was subsidized by the city and is wildly successful and has a 2-year waiting list. And they want it. They want it here, and they're literally, we feel people that are angry saying that they're being discriminated against because there's no market rate development for residential here in Old Town. So I think that we can look right here in Old Town to see where it's working.
But it's saying the Jefferson plan, Jefferson is supposed to be government subsidized. This is going to be low income housing.
No.
So this is going to be top end.
It's gonna be whatever property owner feels it should be, and it's economically viable for the property owner to build. So it's not gonna be government involvement in the development. That's property by property, owner by owner.
We will be taking a careful look at the parking requirements that we're trying to implement also. That has a big piece of the economic puzzle is the parking. And then in addition to that, which we'll get to in the street cross sections, we're looking at the potential for on-street parking to maybe balance the parking issue a little bit.
One, I don't know if it applies to this section, but just a concern about streets and left in, left out, right in, right out. Too much curb and island, especially in Jefferson, could make ingress and egress into some of these retail places difficult at best. You may have to go down, turn around. I know one time there was a big push on Jefferson to get a lot of it in. In fact, it did go in north of Winchester in a section there, and it was pretty tough on those properties where they were dialing in. It solved the traffic problem, but I'm not sure it really helped with the retail. And so I think there's got to be a really good connection between public works, planning, and ownership to be sensitive to that you don't, at the end of the day, create a street or a center that you can't get in and out of.
Right, and that's a good point, because we're going to get to a case study here later on that deals with creating smaller blocks. And I think what your concern is addressing is a long street where they're going to put a median in, go all the way down, turn around, and come back in, and there's only one turn maybe in the halfway through. Now, if you break that up with smaller blocks where you actually have more streets to create a grid network, you won't have to go down a mile to turn around and come back. You'll just turn at the next block and park on the street, right? And you'll see it, you turn, you're right there. So we have a whole case study on that coming up. I think you'll be interested.
Great, thanks.
There seems to be a lot of thought that's been given to traffic calming, which I think is good because it's a lot easier to do traffic calming prior to than afterwards, which is why there's a public traffic safety commission. But one of the thoughts I had was giving some thought to possible one-way streets, particularly when the streets are narrow. It's safer for pedestrians. It solves some of the problems of locating a business, turning in and out. And what it also does is it takes your traffic and spreads it over a wider area. If you do happen to have a parking garage somewhere, you would lead people to the parking garage with one-way streets. I think if we had one-way streets in Old Town, we could be parking garage, which is probably highly underused, and also give a lot more visibility to a lot of the businesses around it because you're forcing people to go a certain direction. But I think also, it does act as a traffic calming. And one of the other thoughts I had was where the stores are close to the street, that also is a traffic calming measure, because anytime that you feel like you're being surrounded by something, you drive slower. And you're looking at businesses, and looking for the store that you want to go to, that's really a good thing in that kind of environment.
I agree with you. Luckily for us, though, in Jefferson, our streets are so wide.
Right.
We have so much right of way.
Yeah.
That would, to do a one-way street would be maybe like 3 lanes going one way. So,
Yeah.
but I
This
agree.
would only be really for narrow
Yeah.
streets, yeah, or where you're looking to make a major change.
No, I have a building here. Right here, it's my building. And I say it's Uptown Arts District, then apparently some overlay in this area. And could you explain to me what is it?
The overlay?
Overlay and what is Uptown Art District? This is all the industrial building or arts building here.
Sure. The Uptown Arts District is proposed to be a mixed-use district with residential and commercial, with a 4-story target for buildings. The overlay, which is overlaid right there on the section next to the creek, right? That's a special district that we've identified and proposed to have only 2-story maximum and residential only because of its proximity to the creek, and to lower that section to preserve the view shed across the creek into the mountains, but only on the creek there, just that sliver between, what is that? Is that Commerce Center?
Yes.
Whatever that's, the street next to the overlay.
This is Enterprise Circle.
Enterprise Circle West, right? So that's a special overlay, and that it's 2 stories, and that's residential, and it's to preserve the view shed.
You know, there's no vacant lot here. This is all built up. So when you lay out master plan showing there all those office building or industrial buildings into residential, what is really goal and objective? How long is it going to take getting torn down office building and putting residential? My point is how realistic what destination is.
The timeline for all that to happen, is that your question? How long it's going to take before all those
No,
buildings are torn
my
down?
question is why do they put residential area in industrial building or office building?
Well, that's kind of what we're here. This whole process is really to talk about is changing the character and nature of the entire area from what it is now to something different, and that something different includes residential and mixed use. And you were at the visionings. I remember you were there.
Yeah, I asked a few times, but we never discussed putting residential there. You know, this is the first time I see it. You're saying the residential overlay here. It can kind of be very troublesome. For example, we're gonna fix the building or whatnot. We might have a difficult time. City might say, hey, eventually we like to see your building torn down, putting the apartment here or condominium here or whatnot.
Right. Well, as long as you're doing improvements to the building that don't increase the building by 50% of total square footage, then you can do that, and you won't be required to adhere to the plan. Now, if you wanted to tear that building down and do something brand new, then you would have to adhere to the plan. And as long as you keep that building there, functioning the way it is, with the uses that are occupied, it can continue in perpetuity in that respect. As long as you want it to continue on, you can continue it on. If you wanted to tear it down, then you would be subject to the plan.
So it is on your specific context, location, so what you just said.
Yes, absolutely. Very much explicit.
So that's the unit in your website, show all those description on it.
And it's important to reiterate again that this is all just a proposed plan at this point. This is what we're here for, to take these comments and incorporate them as best we can.
Yeah, I like to leave that a little further. So you are saying eventually all those industry will go down and put their residential. That's what you're saying, right?
Eventually.
Well, that's what is making the plan.
Eventually.
And I don't know how smart that is because the lifespan of the building is, let's say, 50 years old or not. And my building is only like 10 years old. So you're planning 50 years down the road. That's what you're saying?
No, this plan is a 30-year outlook, and realistically, specific plans don't last 30 years. They are amended and redone 10, 15 years in, just like we did with Old Town. But you start with 30 years, you plan for 30 years, and you make changes along the way. And again, if your building has a useful life of 50 years, then it can stay there for 50 years, as long as the uses don't change.
But that's not my point. My point is designating here residential is not the right idea. It's not a good idea. That's what I'm saying.
And we'll take that under advisement. We have gone through a significant and extensive visioning with the entire community, and the community has recommended to us, and the city council has approved their recommendations, and they want to see residential in this area, along with other commercial uses.
Yeah, but if your city has some money and both those one are a development area, that's a different story.
Well, the city's not going to do that. We don't have the money for that. None of this is going to be redevelopment stuff. None of this is going to be government paid for. This is going to be all market driven. individual owners, individual property owners, in their own good time, under their own economic circumstances, to develop their property as they see fit.
So what is our process from this meeting? When does it kind of go back to kind of continue?
The timeline for the program is we will be conducting these meetings on specific parts of the plan up until the end of the year. And then it's proposed that in January, we'll go to the Planning Commission, and then hopefully in early February, we'll go to the City Council.
So let me ask you further, this arts district, what do you mean?
Arts District is really just a name that, that we chose because of the specific uses that are down there now, whether they be automotive or other craftsman type furniture stores and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have a specific definition that is strict and requires specific uses or excludes specific uses based on the name. It's really just the name.
So your specific plan shows all those actual land use, like a zoning type,
Yes.
actual use?
We have a land use matrix, proposed land use matrix that we referenced in the beginning of the meeting.
Tell me further about this trail. Who's gonna, is the city intend to building trail here?
No, the city's not going to build a trail. The trail is going to be built by the flood control who owns that property. That's probably not going to happen for a long time, but it is a approved plan that will happen eventually. And we got another question over here. I'm gonna.
Two questions, one to the streets and then another aside. Will there be a comprehensive traffic study for maximum density for this plan as part of the environmental docs?
Absolutely.
So that we'll kind of get a handle on whether the small streets will work?
Yeah,
Based on-
absolutely.
just based
Highly
on
detailed
density.
traffic analysis that will tell us exactly what streets are doing what.
Number two, Luke, you had mentioned that if you tore down more than 50% of your building, that you'd have to go with the new plan. How are you determining what 50% is?
Yeah, we talked about this today. It would be a combination probably of what the building department, building official considers 51%, and in conjunction probably with the insurance company.
What if I was doing a remodel, so this wasn't a disaster, and I wanted to, this is something for you to think about, I don't know.
Right.
I wanted to strip it down to the structure and completely redo all of the exterior walls, the roof, essentially leave the structure because the structure's good, but replace everything.
Are you adding square footage?
If I do, it's minor.
Are you adding more than 50% square footage?
No, absolutely not.
Then you probably, most likely, would not have to adhere to the plan.
Thank you.
Anything else? Move on to the next section? Okay, thank you.
So we're going to invite Dale West, who is also a planner with us, and he's going to talk about the hypothetical street foot
Okay, good evening. Let's see. Okay, so Katie did a great job at reviewing the benefits of smaller blocks, narrower streets, the value of street frontage, value of alleys, and the value of bringing the buildings closer to the street. So how do we transform this area to develop in a way that accomplishes the vision of Uptown, Jefferson specific plan? Let's take a look at the existing street network that's down there right now. In this image, the existing streets are in gray, and the smallest block size is, let's see if I got it. Okay. The smallest block size is this rectangle here, because this street doesn't actually go through all the way right now. It's over land. It terminates right here. So this smallest block size right now has a perimeter of approximately 2,100 linear feet. With the majority of the other blocks sizes much larger, upwards of 2,300 linear feet. So this type of development, or this type of street network pattern, you can't accommodate the type of development that we're proposing or anticipating for the Jefferson specific plan. If we look at a hypothetical street grid network, again, existing streets are in gray, hypothetical streets are in red. In this example, new streets, they create the smaller block sizes and support desired urban character and increase the development intensity in the Uptown specific plan area to accommodate the 2.2 million or total of 11 million square feet that's anticipated over the 30-year period. So how is the hypothetical street network achieved? If we look at these proposed block size standards for the various districts of the plan, and each district will have a maximum block length, a maximum block depth, and a perimeter range for each one of the districts shown here. And you see that the perimeter range is, again, the maximum is upwards of that 2,100 linear feet, which is similar to the smallest block size that's currently in within the specific plan area right now. So by reducing the block sizes to within these ranges, we can accommodate the proposed type of development and characteristics of an urban type development. So how do we see the block size standards and future network being implemented? So again, as we mentioned, this is going to be market force, or market forces will dictate this. And as property redevelops, new blocks and streets and alleys will be introduced into the existing network. The additional alleys, common ways, pedestrian pathways, they'll provide that through access to other streets, alleys, and common access easements and pathways. All new streets we are proposing that would be public streets and not private streets. They would be dedicated as conditions of approval for new development. And the city may also consider public investment in the area by including streets in the capital improvement program. So before we move on to reviewing a case study, let's break here and take any questions that you may have.
Well, eminent domain we consider as a tool to create new streets and others.
It could be. That's not what we're proposing right now. The last bullet there that talked about the city putting in a CFP project. What we're proposing is, so there's basically three ways you can look at this. There's no new streets, everything stays the same. The other option, the second option is the city picks where the streets are going to go, puts it into the plan, and the streets are going to go there, regardless. The third way, which is the way we're proposing, is we create these block size dimension standards. So the streets still need to go in, but we're not picking and choosing where they go. It will be up to the developer and the property owner to work within the parameters of the block sizes, put the streets and the alleys and the pedestrian walkways in places that work best for them. But the city still gets the street.
So conceivably, the landowner parcel owner could have the size substantially reduced in order to accommodate streets and alleys. Or, conceivably, we are project to project to project. Some projects could be, sized. So I couldn't really get my bearings on that street plan as to what existing projects would be.
Right, and that's just hypothetical. Those are just lines on a map. Those are not, those don't correspond to our block size standards or anything like that. It's saying this is what the street grid network could look like and how that would affect the character of development. You hit the nail on the head. There are some parcels that might have issues with the street, because of the maximum block size, the street's in an awkward place. Well, the incentive here is, what the city is hoping will happen with this, is that it will incentivize people to consolidate their lots. So buy another lot next to them, create a bigger lot, and then they can fit that street into their
You're
process.
talking like a true public entity. But when it really comes to writing
Sure,
checks, it's hard.
I know,
to do that. It's really hard.
That is
because
probably the stickiest issue.
You're losing value.
Right.
You are losing land size and land sold per square foot.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
then you're having to also fund for those improvements. So,
Yeah.
something to think about.
We're trying to strike a balance between the one option I was talking about, picking streets and saying that's it,
Yeah.
and using eminent domain and that's it, and creating flexibility. It may be not that much, as much flexibility as everyone would like, but it's still flexibility. It still provides you with options to develop your property in a way that works for you and also works for the city and the rest of the community.
I like this idea of these hypothetical streets. And to Carlene's point, let's say you're conditioned where you want to put them in, because it's going to serve the property better. It's going to create better access. You get in and get out different ways. Rear properties will become more intensively used. Maybe you think about, okay, we're going to lose square footage. Can we change coverage ratios? Can we change density ratios? We're giving up for a street. How can you help that owner create a more vital end-use piece of property? It's now maybe bordered by 3 streets. It's eating up some of it, but yet it's fine tuning, and we're way too early, but there's a way I think to make it work.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's what the other part of the plan is doing by allowing you to go up to 5 stories, 8 stories in many places. You're losing the part of the land that's for the street, but you're gaining the ability to intensify your property massively over what you can do now. So I think that is the give and take there that we're trying to build into this project. Sir.
During the capital improvement district, could you go further, such who's gonna pay for it, and how we can in what construction item putting into CIP?
What streets will go into the CIP?
Yeah, definitely, possibly during the capital improvement district to putting new street or whatnot.
So what I think you're asking me is how do we choose which streets go to the CIP and have it
And who's gonna
funded?
pay for it?
The CIP is a capital improvement program. The city has numerous projects. The streets can be funded by numerous different sources.
So not the landowners, but other sources, or landowners?
In the CIP program, those are city funded or other government sources of funds.
There's no assessment for now.
No. When someone comes in to develop their property, they will be required to meet the block standards. And if that means they need to put a street in, or an alley in, or a pedestrian walkway in, that will be a condition of their.
But that is not the CIP.
That's not the CIP.
Yeah.
Move on to the case study. Okay, so we've seen the block size standards, we've seen, Katie's talked about the value of smaller blocks and new streets. What we wanted to do is we wanted to see loosely applying our block standards to see how it could actually happen in the specific plan area on the ground. So what we did is the same area that Katie was talking about earlier. We're going to look at this area here between Winchester, Jefferson, down to Overland, around here to Enterprise Circle West, right? So Just as a comparison again, this is Old Town. This is an average Old Town block. It's 2.75 acres, it's 1,400 linear square feet. This is what we call a standard builder's block. It's 40 acres, 6,250 linear square feet. This is the smallest block in Jefferson. It's double the size of anything in Old Town. So this is the area we wanted to see, well, what could possibly happen if the standards were applied. So if you remember from the visioning, we looked at the old State of Builder site, which is now where the bowling alley is, and we did a development scenario there. That development scenario added these two streets. So this would be this is basically mostly on that large parking lot there. So it would create these two new blocks right here. So building on that, we thought, well, if the adjacent property owners here wanted to develop, and in order to adhere to the block standards, something like that might be required, which would then connect right away, and would create this new block here, and would create this new block here. So continuing on, if property owners in this area wanted to go ahead and follow the lead of these property owners, something like this might occur. Punching Enterprise Circle through, creating this new block. And this may not be a street, it may be an alley, I don't know. It's it could be a number of different things. And then finally, and logically, Commerce Center Drive could eventually punch through here, creating this block, all through here, this block, this block, this block, this block, this block, and then when Overland punches through, which is going to happen, the bridge is going to be put in, you have now two blocks where you had one block. So when you look, one more thing. Alleys are always encouraged, and these are potential areas for alleys. So with all the alleys and all the streets, this is to scale with Old Town in this area, where we had three enormous blocks, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 blocks. The blocks are still larger on average than Old Town. They're much more manageable for pedestrians, much more manageable for wayfinding for pedestrians and people in automobiles. And you've created an enormous amount of street frontage and visibility for owners, business owners and property owners. And you can see, this is roughly, if you stretch this out a little bit, it's roughly the same area as Old Town. So we're talking about a lot of new streets, and there's a lot of cross sections that would happen because the street has a lot of different characteristics in a lot of different places. But just to give you an idea of what a cross section could look like, this is Jefferson. This is a section of Jefferson Avenue. This is a 100-foot right-of-way section of Jefferson. And if you recall Jefferson now, you have 4 lanes, 2 going north, 2 going south. You have a center lane, which is a turn lane. And you have no on-street parking. You have no legitimate dedicated bike path. And you have spotty at best sidewalks. So taking that 100-foot right-of-way, proposing to put an 8-foot raised median with either landscaping or street lights, keeping the 2 travel lanes, but including now a dedicated bike lane, on-street parking, and 10 foot of city-owned sidewalk where street lights and street trees would be located, and then 10 foot of privately owned sidewalk, with the building pulled up to the build-to line, 10 foot behind the property line. And then, of course, the mirror on the other side of the street. And down below, you can see basically a straight down aerial shot of what a street like this might look like. And when we talk about streetscape beautification and the streetscape beautification elements that would go into these cross sections, we're talking about decorative street lights, street trees, median landscaping, pavers, and signage, and signage that is of a branding nature for the entire area. And all of these items will go into a streetscape beautification plan that will be part of the specific plan, and it will cover every cross-section of every street that exists today. And I think we can all imagine ourselves on streets that we've been down that include all these items. And it's a fairly pleasant experience, and you can see here on the right, this is Santana Row in San Jose. You can see the median landscaping, some additional treatment here, the street lights, street trees, pedestrian pathway, and then of course with buildings pulled up to the street. So, I know we have some questions on this. Comments?
Is it feasible that these streetscapes can go in sooner rather than later? Is there a timing in mind?
The timing, of course, if it was to be city paid for or government paid for, we would be looking mostly at Jefferson as a great street, as like we did in Old Town with the demonstration street, most impact. I believe it's a Tump Street, so there's that funding too. But we would be looking at improving Jefferson. Unfortunately, I sound like a broken record, we don't have the redevelopment funding to go ahead and do that, so what would happen is it would have to go into the CIP program and be done in phases over time. And then the other streets would be done as they were built per development.
Understood that. So, okay. Is there, in your capital improvement plan, when you think this, something like this can be introduced?
Well, it could be introduced any year.
Okay.
It's just a matter of dedicating the funds towards it. And so we have, every year we have $5 million in just in upkeep to the streets, but it's just a matter of will. Larry?
Question for you with regard to bumping up the section from 100 feet to 120 feet. The majority of Jefferson, with the exception of the intersection of Rancho Front and Overland and Winchester, actually probably flows very well as a one-lane section, one lane in each direction, and then enhance the intersections to get the turn lane capacity, especially once you get Overland over the creek. You get Cherry/Metro Valley Parkway, that's going to strip a lot of traffic off of Jefferson through the day. So, it almost would be, I think you should take a look at, as opposed to going to a 4-lane divided street, to go, possibly to a 2-lane with intersection enhancements. You more usable, more buildable space, and not take away another 20 feet of land for right-of-way. Those areas, and once again, pull the buildings in tighter to the traveled way, similar to Old Town, and decrease the scale of those streets. Because the problem is like we said earlier, the bigger, wider, faster, straighter the street is. I mean, the bigger, wider, it is, less obstructions, the faster the speed.
Okay.
And, you literally, even if there weren't any stop signs on Front Street. Which, by the way, the city originally opposed all the stop signs on Front Street, just FYI.
Yeah.
And now we'd be killing people on a daily basis if we didn't have them. You almost, I don't think anybody probably go over 35 miles an hour down Front Street for most stop signs. But Jefferson, I got rear-ended by a face speed car at the corner of Jefferson Overland at 65 miles an hour. Stop at the stop line. And I think if you could reduce that scale down, I think it would be far better for the overall plan, as opposed to widening it out and pushing the buildings further away from the traffic lanes.
Right. A couple of things. We have to wait to get the traffic analysis back. If the traffic analysis says that what we have is failing and failing badly, then we probably won't be able to do that.
The intersections, the peak hour intersections are failing.
They're failing. No question.
That's a given, but hopefully with French Valley Parkway and Western Bypass and connection to Diaz, across the creek and Overland across the creek, that should relieve a lot of that.
Oh, absolutely, it will. And the second item was, down in Old Town, in the specific plan for Old Town, there actually is a 10-foot property line setback to the Bill 2 line. So this is essentially mirroring that. So you have 10 foot of sidewalk that's city-owned, and then 10 foot of sidewalk that's privately owned. But in that 10 foot of sidewalk that's privately owned, restaurants and businesses can can engage in business there. They can put out chairs and tables and earn money on that land.
A short-term question, just right down the road here. In February, because the city council, they approved the plan. The zoning changes. Currently, where my building is located, I'm on a quiet side street. I can legally unload a truck in the street because it's a commercial zone. Once the zoning changes, will I no longer be able to unload a truck in the street?
You absolutely will. The alleys are where we would like people to do that if they exist. It's not going to change where you can unload. It's not going to make illegal what you're doing now. You can, if you're loading in the street, then
Can I have that in mind?
well, I don't know exactly what you're doing,
Yeah.
so I
Well,
can
I'm
say,
gonna
okay, well, I'll take your word for it. But you know, that's not the goal of the plan.
Well, because I'm thinking it's another way to push us out. I mean, it's another step of eminent domain.
I'm not aware of anything in the plan that would make it's not illegal in Old Town. I mean, you have to be able to load and do business. You know, we just would prefer you to do it in the alley if it exists.
There is no notice.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay, well, Neil, did that kind of get to the point of the streets being really long and having to turn around a mile away?
It's directionally, it's going the right place.
Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Katie. She's going to walk us through the rest of the project schedule and where we go from here.
All right, so we've almost made it all the way through the third steering committee, so we're halfway there. We will have 3 more steering committees, each one monthly. The last one is scheduled for December, and once that's the steering committees are all done, we are hoping to have the draft plan probably in late December of 2013, getting to Planning Commission early January 2014, and then City Council in either late January, early February, for them to adopt the plan and certify the environmental impact report. And so just to remind everybody, we have 3 more steering committee meetings. The next one is going to be October 29th, and we will be talking about mobility, circulation, and congestion management. We'll hopefully have a little bit more information on the outcome of the traffic study at this meeting. And then November 19th, we'll be talking about the plan administration and the sign standards. And in December, talking about infrastructure, CIP, plan financing, and probably our design guidelines. So that is it. You're welcome. And again, the project website is still up and running, and all of the information from these meetings will be available for you on the website. Larry?
Okay, will there be will the specific plan have an SP sum embedded in it? Or will it just be just a specific one?
An SP
Well, I
zone?
mean, like the zoning code with it that's going to be unique to this plan?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're not looking to, are you looking to do with the plan adoption, any consistency zoning with the plan adoption, or the current zones that are in place today in the city's consistently zoned plan stay in place for a period of time?
That will all change over and become the new specific plan will be the new zoning. As a part of this process, we are looking at a potential general plan amendment to make sure the zoning and the general plan are consistent.
Well, in the zoning, then how you going to accommodate the indicating the existing building will be so. We are not really adopting existing zoning in the city, but it will be kind of a zoning you have to create such a way. The existing building has to stay there, this office building, it will stay there lifetime of the office building. Then there's overlay area. Or we just showing the general plan. So zoning remaining same as the existing whatever it is. Like in that case, that's the industrial area. So that area zoning, I'm talking about overlay along the River Creek. Zoning remaining as industrial. Then overlay. Really, my question is how you're going to show overlay? It will be as a general plan or just one item on specific plan?
It won't be an overlay. The existing zoning will go away, and the new zoning from the specific plan will come in. The overlay there is an overlay on top of the new zoning that is going in with it. So wiping out the old zoning, putting in the new zoning, and then
So
on top of the new zoning will be an overlay in the area you're talking about.
So new zoning will be specified zone, not matching existing zoning in the city code.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, with regard to that, since you are rezoning everything consistent with the new specific plan, what's going to be the provision for sunsetting legal prior existing non-conforming uses? Because you basically will make everything for all intents and purpose of legal prior existing non-conforming use as of the date of the consistency zone.
We wouldn't have a specific sunset clause in the plan. It wouldn't say, you know, upon this date, everything has to go away. It would primarily be driven by the market forces. So any business that's out there and it's a legal non-conforming business, they would be able to continue until they thought they wanted to switch over and utilize the new zoning.
So that's a very important point that we want to reiterate.
Yeah.
That what's there can continue on forever, essentially, as long as it's viable and stays there, and doesn't discontinue use for a year.
Right.
So-
For the solar purpose, I just want to clarify that will include change of ownership?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So let me clarify, I mean that part. When that draft copy of new zoning will be available for property review?
I'm sorry. Say that
When that new zoning you're discussing
Right.
will be available for us
The draft plan will
Yeah.
be ready in December. Our plan is to have it ready in December. Because we're going to plan.
The draft zoning will be ready in December.
Yes.
Correct.
The draft specific plan will be ready, which includes the zoning.
So then you're gonna post on the city website.
Website, you can contact us, we can give you a copy.
No, the giving us copy is nice, but we like to know when you done that, posting on the website, we like to take a look on it.
Sure.
Or, you know, you draft copy, you know.
Whatever you
I'm
want.
gonna give my, on my card, and we're gonna make sure everything is, you know, done nice and,
Yeah, we will post it on the project website so that you can access both the draft specific plan document and the draft environmental impact report. That'll be on the project website, so if you're checking back there, that's probably the best
and
way
could you
to
email
access
to
it.
us those stuff, you know, we just register here? Or really, you guys sending me all those, my email is there.
To email to let you know if it's up?
Yeah, that is ready, yeah.
Sure,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
One question with regard to this, with regard to the non-conforming use, as I recall in your zone code, there is a provision, you know, for the like, I think most zone codes do like 30 years, that once legal non-conforming uses become legal non-conforming, they basically sunset out in 30 years. So I just want to make sure of that, because that's a very important point with regard to, you know, several people here that just make sure we're not inconsistent with something in the rest of the zoning code that would basically be a conflict. So, because I know most codes, it's usually 30 years. And
Well, that's a good point.
Everything in our
We'll
development code.
talk to the city attorney about that. We'll do a review and make sure that there's no conflict there.
very good. And you didn't change the expiration from to match up with basically your standard conditions of approval that say that you cease to use for a year, and the land use approval basically expires or ceases to exist.
In our conditions of approval?
You know, your conditions, you say cease to use. You have a plot plan or golf plan approval, you stop the use for a year today, your approval is gone. So I think before you were talking about 6 months. And previous-
In this, yes, for the legal
And you
non-conforming.
changed it to a year.
Yes,
So, okay, so it's consistent.
With an additional hardship application
Right.
processes.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Great.
Thank you
Very
very
much.
much.
See you next time.
See you next time.